I just want to also add to this. Marvin, this is someone that I overlapped with while I was at Trinity College, and um, in as much as he may not have known that this would have been his calling, like I think that he got his start at Trinity at least because like this is something he's always been super passionate about. Like even then, like it may not have been like as defined as it is right now, but like it has made a difference in the lives of a lot of people. Like he mentioned Duranza Gross, who was like a mentor to him, and Marvin like made it possible for that mentorship to be passed down. And the guy that he mentored below him, who was like a grade above me, like Marvin instilled in him the importance of like passing that down, and that's why this guy mentored me, and it created this chain. So he ended up at Goldman Sachs and he was crushing it. And I after Trinity College, this is like 2009 when things were rough. I ended up working at Citigroup. So props to you, Marvin, for just really like being true to yourself, like all the way through.
Appreciate it.
So one of the questions that's actually come up for us is a question about mentorship. So I thought maybe I'd go right there since we're on the theme. It sounds like that was an extraordinary chain of mentors, and I know that mentorship is something that a lot of my students are looking for. How did you seek out mentors when you were at Trinity, and how did these sort of lasting relationships form for you? And how did you sustain them? Oh, and I should say, why don't I go first to Marvin?
Yeah, I used to attend a lot of the alumni gatherings that they had on campus and then also in New York City. So they had like those city like alumni gatherings during the holiday seasons, and I started to attend a lot of those. And you know, I developed this, and I think I had this understanding that, you know, it was important for me to build a strong network to, you know, get access to internships and really get guidance from folks who have, you know, walked the path that I'm currently on, you know, to get advice on how to do it the right way. And so I think the first time I met Jawanza was in a New York alumni gathering. And, you know, I told him, I said, I want to work on Wall Street. Right. And, you know, he was at Morgan Stanley at the first time when I met him. And, you know, it eventually, you know, developed into a long life lasting relationship. But like the first time I met him, he was like, if you want to do this, you better really be committed to like the level of mentorship that I provide. Right. And so it's kind of like, don't mess around, like, don't waste my time. Like, I'm committed to you. Make sure you're returning, you know, you're showing that you're committed to this development. And I was like, man, this is intense. So, you know, but it was what I needed. Right. And I think it prepared me for the world that I'm in now. Right. I have really tough skin, and I approached that work. And I think that was embedded in me by Jawanza from my freshman year all the way through. You know, I ended up pledging a fraternity, and you know, he was okay with it. I said, all right, you know, let me see if Jawanza is going to give me the okay on this. And he said, listen, it's fine. You better not, you know, your GPA better not drop, because you have to be competitive in order to get a Wall Street internship at that time, and then also a full-time offer. And so the pressure that he applied, I think, was so critical. But I think I leveraged a lot of those alumni gatherings to really start to develop, I guess, a Rolodex of alumni that I could actually engage with to help me create a strong career path for myself after I graduated from Trinity.
That's great. Karraine or Rhoden, did you want to get in here on this mentoring question, how to form and sustain these relationships?
Let's hear from Karina, and I'll happy to be follow up. But like Marvin, I think crushed it. So I think I will second a lot of what he said for sure. I also had the very similar experience with Jawanza Gross.
Sounds good. No, sounds good. I worked closely with Professor Alta Lash at the time, and had an opportunity to, you know, one of the things that community development has gone through so many cycles, but I think at the core of it is, are you going to feed a man a piece of fish? Or are you going to teach him how to fish? And that was the breakdown that was like the core of the 101 for community development. How much empowerment, how much, you know, are you going to empower people to be able to own, to do, and not be dependent upon the system and not have to constantly come back to that system for help. And, you know, when it came down to voter registration and how to advocate for, you know, voting rights and making sure that even the educational piece, if I was to go back, you know, to Marvin's comment, how do you teach parents to advocate for their children? And so many times I think, you know, sometimes, you know, especially if you coming from, I'm living in Hartford, you know, I'm learning about everything that's happening from the politics to the budgeting, how does money get spent and where does the money go? And I realized at that moment, like she said to me, she said, sometimes you just have to be upfront and just honest and brutally blunt about what it is and what it's not. And when you can, if it has to get to that point, then you have to walk in your truth, you know? And so that was very empowering for me to be like, okay, there's a time and a place for me to be politically correct. And then there's a time for me to just let it be real. And you have to swallow it, because I'm not going to sidestep the reality of what it is to be living in poverty, or how it is to not have a home, and what does it feel like to always be dependent upon a system. So I think many times it was just like, and I'm not sure if any of you know Professor Lash, but she is exactly to the point. There's a filter, but you know, she's going to tell you exactly what it is and what it's not. So I really, really appreciated that. After graduating from Trinity, I did not go immediately into nonprofit like everyone else. I had bills, so I wanted to work for UTC. And I tried to, like, you know, this is the part to me that was really eye-opening, is that I was trying to bring my community development to corporate. And one of my mentors at the time said to me, sweetheart, this is not it, okay? And then I eventually transitioned into Hartford Public Schools, but I had to learn, you know, in what lane does it flow? And how can you take the lessons that you're learning from one mentor, and does it fit, or it may not fit, but you may have to get in that lane that you actually belong in and within your purpose.
Yeah. I will add to the mentorship conversation and say this. For me personally, I came to America when I was 12 years old. I came up here with my sister. I was accompanied by my aunt. My mom was living in America. And so when I got here, the only people I knew in the entire country were my mom and my sister. My aunt went back to Martinique. That's where she lived. I live in St. Lucia, but a lot of my life, I mean, my development, I don't think it would be possible without mentorship. Coming to like a foreign country, just figuring things out on the fly. Like Marvin, I went to I went to a New England boarding school. I went to Middlesex in Concord, Mass. And I mean, just imagine the transition from like St. Lucia to Harlem, New York, to prep school in New England in like a 2-year span. I don't think like a lot of my success would be possible without mentorship. And I certainly have a lot of key mentors that I've developed from my high school at Middlesex. But I think formative in terms of just door opening that shaped my trajectory, like my professional trajectory. A lot of it comes from Trinity. And we've talked about Jawanza Gross and like his massive influence in both Marvin and I. I was part of SIU, so I also did a fraternity. And in that, I had some guidance from Brian Sanko, who's another Trinity guy. He helped open some doors, which gave me an interview at Citigroup, which then like led to me getting a job there, and spent 5 really productive years at Citigroup doing exactly like what I hoped I would be doing, like after I graduated Trinity, which was like not hard to accomplish, just given just the market at the time. But then I decided that I was gonna like leave the financial services industry and start my own company. And then there were more mentors from Trinity that helped make a lot of things possible. In the very early days, there was Sophie Bell Ayers. She played such an important role in helping to provide guidance for like my journey to like leave a very safe and high paying job to having no pay and starting a company. And then that went to the Trinity godfather, Paul Rather. Let's just call it what it is. Paul Rather played such an important role in terms of not just providing capital for my company to grow, but like access to his network and mentorship. He reminds me a lot of like what I appreciate about like Joe Joanza, in that like he's tough but like very fair, and that is exactly that formula like works really well for me, because I'm always striving to grow, and like being able to connect with people who have like already achieved that like level of success gives me a benchmark to like aim for. So.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm getting such a strong sense. We all know the strength of the Trinity network, but it's amazing to hear about its influence in all of your stories so clearly. So we're getting a few good questions in the chat. There was first a relatively quick one for Marvin, and that was just someone was looking to hear just a few more words about the mission of your organization, and then another person was wondering whether you were planning to take your organization national.
Yeah, our mission is to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. So we work with young people 14 to 19 years of age, helping them complete their education through a high school equivalency diploma, vocational training, and then also employment placement. And then we also focus on social emotional support. In terms of the question around national expansion, we definitely are interested in that. We actually are working right now on designing a high school called the Justice Hub. It will focus on specifically servicing young people who are in foster care, justice involved, experiencing homelessness, and also teen parents. In the city of Houston, this population, and also nationally, they don't graduate from high school. And to make matters worse, they're disconnecting from systems of support or aging out of systems of support without the critical foundation skills that they need to actually stand on their own as independent adults. And they're all ending up in either the criminal justice system, unemployed. And so I just really think, for me, one of the things that I'm motivated about is taking on life's most pressing issues. That's what drives me. That's what motivates me. I'm a disruptor of systems that limit the potential of our most vulnerable youth. And, you know, the 8 Million Stories brand, if we have some funders on the call and people with some deep pockets or access to it, happy to take it to another city, because I think school to prison pipeline is a very real thing in this country, and it impacts Black kids, Black and brown kids of all walks of life. And I think this is something that we as a country have not figured out how to solve. And, you know, I think hopefully with more success of our organization and more funding to expand, we can really start to make a dent and change lives.
So Alicia Jenkins, that was her question, and I think Jay as well. And Alicia in particular says, "This is awesome. Thank you, Marvin." So thanks for that question. Marvin, you actually give me a nice segue before I turn to some of the other questions from the audience. I did want to raise an issue that I think is on all of our minds these days. This spring, we've really had what some people have taken to calling twin pandemics. So clearly the global health pandemic of COVID, but also the ongoing pandemic of systemic racism in our country. And I'd really love to hear about how those twin pandemics and the way that they're sort of manifesting in 2020 are affecting all of your work. So why don't I bring Karraine in on this, and then I'll go to the others as well.
Mute.
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me, okay.
Yeah.
You know, I would say, if I was to speak just as a mom, I have to speak as a mom first. I'm raising two young Black boys that will grow up to be Black men. And I think, for my husband and I, the challenge is to, and I know I'm hoping, and I know it's not happening everywhere, but the reality is that you're constantly wanting to make sure that your child is safe. And you're trying to make sure that health-wise they're safe and that they're growing up knowing who they are and having that sense of identity. That's the first initial response for me. When I take it to, what has happened in the United States and across the world, I have to say that I, in many ways, have become sort of desensitized to it. And many times I have to like sort of shake myself and say, this is real. You have to think outside of what's happening in your household and really see the bigger picture. So I think, for me, that's the core of the response. I know that I went through, if I'm just clearly, I went through some emotions this spring. Really went through some serious emotions, especially when I observed, the comment about stay home. And the reality is, for some folks, they don't have a home. They don't have a home. So you say stay home, it doesn't equate, or when I think about our homeowners where the majority of them are essential workers, they can't stay home. They can't. And so, it becomes such a clash of the have-nots. And how do you communicate that to the world? And how do you still stay authentic to the reality of who you are and who you serve and their benefit? I know, one of the conversations that I had was when all of the organizations were putting out these statements of, we're going, equitable. And to me, I said in one of, some comments came back and said, oh, we should do that. And my initial response is, I do this all day long. I don't have to put out a statement because this is what I live and breathe. And I think, that it took a while to communicate that to other folks so that they can understand that when you're a person of color, you live it every single day. And when you walk in the room, the first thing they notice is what you are. And the second thing is, should you be where you are? How did you get there? So, when it becomes this magnetized, okay, everybody's talking about it, I began to question is it genuine? Is it true? And part of me said, it will pass over. I'm waiting to see if the real change will happen. I'm waiting to see what's going to happen in 2022. And I'm not thinking about 2020. I'm thinking about what's going to happen long term, because real change takes time and it doesn't happen with a statement. So that's my hardcore mama talking.
Yeah, and we have lots of thanks for your words in the chat there. I don't know if you can see it, but thank you from Alicia and also from Jamie Saul. Rhoden, could I ask you to talk a little bit about how you've seen these twin pandemics affecting your work these past 6 months?
My God. So this has been a very, very heavy experience for me in so many ways. Just having to deal with one pandemic is a lot. Having to deal with a pandemic that basically has existed for what, like 400 years, maybe longer. That was another layer attached to the fact that my mother, who got me to America, my sister, who's 1 year younger than me, she graduated medical school about 3 months ago in New York City. She's now, and I'm so proud of this because like we came such a long way. She's now a doctor at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. Like, proud big brother. My mom, as a social worker, is another like point of pride, because I mean, when she came to America, she did not have the equivalent of a high school degree, and she was able to lead by example, right? So she got us into the best schools, but she wanted to also make sure that she got an incredible education. And she ended up graduating from NYU, their School of Social Work. And she works at a hospital because she works with a lot of diabetes patients who are not able to help themselves. And so for me, like, it's been a very heavy experience in that sense. Both my mother and my sister have been involved in New York City during the pandemic. That was already heavy by itself. And then we like add on to that the whole situation with George Floyd and the protesting. I will be honest with you, I kind of like reflect on Karraine's statement. Like, I didn't think that anyone would care. I thought that a lot of people would just see it as, oh, just another like headline, and 2 weeks later it's going to be gone. I did not, honestly, didn't expect the reaction that we have now. I think it's great. I think that the awareness is not going to solve everything, but it helps to put things in perspective. It helps to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations that should have happened a long time ago. And I think that hopefully some good will come out of it. I don't think it will solve everything. That would just be wishful thinking, but I do believe in the people who are on the ground, who are 1,000 times more motivated to make sure that a solution comes out of this. And I'm sure I will hear from Marvin about like what his experience has been on the ground. But like, for me, I'm not like, with my company, I'm not on the ground in the way that Marvin is. I'm not on the ground as Karraine is, but we have the unique opportunity to solve one problem, which has been like a plague of problems of many, right? So we have a platform that allows nonprofits to recruit board members. There's a huge disparity in the representation of board members in terms of having people of color on their board, people who understand, who come from the communities that the nonprofits are serving. That is a problem that I know I could solve. My company is purpose-built to solve board matching. And now we are in a position to solve board matching nationally. And if anything could come out of this, at least from my end, 5 years from now, like when companies talk about like what they can and cannot do, and when nonprofits talk about like where they are, board diversity is should not be like a problem that like arises, or more specifically, the whole problem of like not being able to identify and connect with the candidates that they need should not be a real reason why they don't have a diverse board. They don't have to pay for our platform. It's like, this is something that we could solve, and I'm excited about that. It's been a journey, and like to Karraine's point, like I growing up in Harlem was very challenging. My mother was very keenly aware of the challenge of like raising me in Harlem, and in as much as going to Middlesex to her was sending me to get the best possible education, it was also for her knowing that my chances of being in the wrong place at the wrong time and having an encounter with the police that would like be detrimental to my health, that was not lost on her.
So I have a follow-up question from an alumnus and a couple of parents on this, and I'm going to turn to Marvin in a second. But Rhoden, you were just talking a little bit about the work of your organization and how it can contribute. We have an alumna, Serena, from the class of 14, who would like to know how to connect and as a board applicant. So are you looking for board applicants, and how would people sign up?
So, I mean, our clients are corporations. So that's the nonprofits don't pay for CariClub. The people who pay are the companies. And I think that's the right way to do it. And the companies are actually happy to pay for it because they benefit from like the leadership development that comes from serving on a board. You have a much more like a happier, more fulfilled workforce that to the company like actually are very productive, and that the data supports that. In order to come to be part of CariClub, just send me an email, firstname@cariclub.com, and we could have a more extensive conversation there. I want to pass over the mic to Marvin.
Okay, and Marvin, if I could just also ask you in your comment to address a new question that's come in that's related. So Joe Barkley, who's class of 70, so the great 50th reunion class that just missed their reunion, unfortunately, but also parent of someone in the class of 93, and also with Mary Lou Ambrose. And they ask, how do you view the importance of the talk with children, and what can Americans do to make the talk unnecessary? So I think talking with children about discrimination and police violence is what Joe and Mary Lou are referring to, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, so both of the pandemics have impacted my work directly. We've seen a lot of our kids with COVID-19 regress as a result of us having to move to remote learning, virtual learning. We did that when the pandemic first started back in March, and we went all the way through the summer. And a lot of our kids, because of their home environments and their community situations, they weren't really set up for success in terms of being able to continue to engage in their personal development and academic learning in a virtual setting. And we saw a lot of our kids end up back inside of the criminal system. We had actually lost one of our kids. He was shot and killed during the pandemic phase. And then we also had two of our girls become teen moms. And so one of the things that we are very big on is making sure that our kids have a safe space. And when the pandemic hit, that space wasn't present, right? And so for disconnected youth, having access to adults, caring adults at all times is critical. And, you know, we were limited in terms of the support we could provide, right? We try to do as much check-ins with our kids virtually, but many of them didn't have internet. They didn't have access to computers. And although we were doing our best to ensure that all of our kids had the necessary technology, there were others, you know, factors at play as well that got in the way of how we were able to service our kids. And so it has put us in a position where we're actually returning back to in-person learning, but doing it in a very unique, like hybrid format where we're splitting the roster of students that we have, and we're bringing in like 17 kids a day, and then another group comes in the next day. And so giving them the opportunity to stay connected to what our work is something that we're really focused on this year. In terms of just the issues around race, for us, it really just continued to amplify our work. I think we didn't get excited, invested in our work because George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were killed, right? We were doing this work much sooner than that because we knew that there were some systemic issues that were causing, inequity to live in our country. And we started that work much sooner than, the world caught on. And I think the world caught on to this because it forced us to all be standing still, right? We were all confined to our homes. And I think if we didn't have COVID, issues around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor would probably not be a conversation right now because you have the ability to turn it on and off, right? But when we're confined to our homes, you have no choice but to engage in that. And I think the way I've leveraged this situation is to educate the population more, right? The community more about the work. I think one of the things we see in Houston that's really concerning for me is that how uneducated our community is about the inequity that exists in education, right? And that has been magnified even more, right? We're talking about virtual learning, and some kids are able to make that transition because they have the access and resource and the support to actually make that successful transition. But we know for many of our kids, especially our kids of color, that is not something that they have, right? And so when we think about whenever we just end up coming out of this pandemic, right, the gaps for our kids, especially our Black and brown children, are going to be even more wide. And that's going to be a conversation we're going to have among school officials, elected officials, around how do we, close those gaps that are going to be really difficult to close. And so I just think that, this work, we're using this opportunity or this platform to really amplify the conversations around how do we do this better? How do we educate folks around the needs? Like, for instance, in Houston, we refer 12,000 kids a year to our juvenile justice system directly from our schools between the ages of 10 to 18. And many of those referrals to the justice system are for nonviolent offenses that when we were in school, it was a suspension, in-school suspension, at worst, out-of-school suspension. But kids are now leaving high school, middle school, and sometimes elementary school in handcuffs, right? And so, and when we look at the racial demographics of our juvenile system in Houston, 40% of the student population in the juvenile detention centers are Black youth. And what's crazy about that percentage is that Black children only make up 19% of the entire school district. Houston has the 7th largest district in the country, and only 19% of them are Black students, but they're the majority in our detention facilities. And so what are we as a city saying about Black children and how we value them, right? They don't matter, right? And so that is really the conversation that I'm having with funders, corporations, that this is your problem as well, right? You don't get to live in a silo and say, this is an issue around poverty. It is in some instances, but there's also a conversation that needs to be had around how we as stakeholders locally and nationally putting policies in place that create more equitable experiences for all of our children to be successful. And that's not happening right now locally in Houston. And that's really where a lot of my energy is being pushed, because I'm getting the end of the outcome of us not having equitable schools, right? I have a higher population of kids who are now even more disconnected from school. And so I will probably see my enrollment numbers of students that I serve increase as a result of this pandemic, because we had kids who were already disconnecting from traditional schools. Now, because we're now virtual, they've disconnected even more because other pressing needs have become a priority.
Yeah. I was really interested to hear what you were saying about, this very intense and important work that you're doing on the ground, but also bridging that to these discussions with corporate America. And of course, that's also what Rhoden is doing with increasing board diversity and increasing these discussions on boards. One thing that I noticed in this discussion today is that all three of you initially, when you came out of Trinity, I think I heard, went into corporate America and then pivoted. I'd like to just ask you, because I have so many students, with corporate America, I think there's a little bit of a clearer path. There are these internship programs, what track you need to get on. But with this kind of transformational social entrepreneurship and nonprofit work that you do, the path is less clear. And so we had a question really early on from an alumna, Jamie Zoll, who sort of asked, what made you realize your vocation? And then I'm really curious to hear like, what was that first step that allowed that pivot for you towards the leadership positions that you're in today? I think that our students and young alumni would really love to hear that. And I'd love to go to Karraine first.
My mom is very spiritual, so I'm just going to be straight. And she always was praying, and she said, you have to fulfill purpose. And I thought I was going to do engineering. And I was at UTC, I was in En-ROADS. I'm not sure if anybody know about En-ROADS, but I was in En-ROADS and I was on that track. But I think in the end, it was the classes that I was taking. It was the exposure I was getting. I realized that I could stay up for hours and not sleep if I was dealing with a paper that was around some social economic crisis, and that I had, nonstop energy to advocate for others. I think for me, I started off saying, well, I have this sort of built-in job so that as soon as I graduate, I have it. And I actually transitioned into a department within UTC. I was at Hamilton, then I went to the Gold Bell, I was at headquarters, and I transitioned into a department that was like basically community contributions and community giving for UTC. So I felt like I was still producing and giving back, and I can, you know, be a part of it. But in the end, it was not enough. It did not fill my tank. And so I knew that I had to transition out. And it was a hard, it was a hard switch, because you go from corporate and you know, you have good salary, good benefits, everything is laid out, we can make it work. And I remember my first transition from working in the school system, which paid relatively well, and then transitioning to Habitat. And I was at that time, I was the director of family services. So for me, that was right up my alley. I'm dealing with people, I'm helping parents, I'm working with, you know, children and, you know, elders. But that was a significant pay cut. That was like $30,000. My husband looked at me and said, "Are you crazy? Like, we got a mortgage, what?" You know, but in the end, it was just knowing that I wanted to get up every morning and be in my purpose. And I wanted to know that I was, you know, fulfilling that. And I knew I was happy doing for people and making stuff happen. And so corporate couldn't do it. It couldn't fill that button. It couldn't fill the tank. So you just make that leap of faith and, you know, you jump.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful to sort of see the steps that you took there. I'll go to Rhoden and then to Marvin on the same question.
Yeah, so for me, it was a combination of like passion, purpose, and like practicality. When I was at Trinity College, I knew that as a freshman, I knew that I was going to graduate with some amount of like college debt. So that was never lost on me at all from like day one. So I knew that I needed to somehow manage to like not have that follow me around, and just knowing what I knew about like just debt. I took a freshman year seminar at Trinity College that honestly, it was like such a beautiful experience. I learned so much. I enjoyed it thoroughly. My professor, who I'm to this day like still really good friends with, because she's amazing, is Professor Raskin from the neuroscience department. Like she really like, she's amazing. Like I cannot speak her praises enough. But then I just was not sure exactly like how I would be able to like parlay like neuroscience towards like paying off my debt. And so like I just made this like decision to switch to economics, because I was like, well, that's what people do when they want to like make money and work on Wall Street. This is like something I had to just like decide as a freshman by myself. So I switched to economics. That went well. I mean, no like issues with economics, but like I knew that it was like a necessary step. Thankfully, I actually did enjoy economics. I did enjoy my time. I think I really benefited and grew from my experience working on Wall Street. But it was not lost on me that I made this decision for a reason other than like I'm going to enjoy this. And so when I worked in finance, I definitely found it very challenging. And I am all about like a good challenge. That makes a lot of things more fun. But what kept me from going down that road was really the fact that I felt that I needed to pay the universe for like the fortune that I had in life. So many things could have like not gone right. And so that was always weighing on me. And I definitely grew up in a religious household. I don't know if that's like connected or not. But it was important to me that I felt that I was doing something to pay it forward. And CariClub worked out well because I felt like I wouldn't say this out loud, but I'm going to say it out loud. I felt like I was cheating, where like I was starting a company that was going to make money and is making money, but like it's also doing good. So to me, I was like, okay, I get the best of both worlds. I get to start a like money making machine company that's like doing a lot of good in the world. How could I ever say no to that? Like I felt like CariClub found me in a lot of ways. It like balanced out this equation of my desire to like want to give back and like pay it forward, and my desire to just like want to be successful and grow and challenge myself, and make money. Also, like related to that was the fact that like my life on Wall Street made it possible for me to like pay for my sister to go to get her post-baccalaureate, which then made it possible for her to go to medical school. And now she's a doctor. So I literally have like no regrets. Mm-hmm. Like life is good. Like there are definitely challenges, there are speed bumps, but all things considered, with just the mentorship that I have, and the experiences that I've had, the inspiration and motivation, I have a lot more left in my tank.
Yeah, that's great. It's really helpful to hear about the sort of different social entrepreneurship path as well. We are heading pretty close up to 8 o'clock, but I wanted to just, if Marvin wanted to get in on this question, you told us a little bit about how you found your vocation for this work, but do you have any sort of last bits of advice for students and young alumni on how they can make a difference if they're interested in this kind of field?
Yeah, I would first start to, by saying to them, find your purpose. This is not sexy work. It's extremely hard. It's very lonely. We started 8 Million Stories with $60,000 in the hole. I had no fundraising experience and knew no funders, and I bet on myself. And so to young people who are looking to do good, there is, good that comes out of that, right? But there also is a challenge. And so really just be firm in terms of understanding what you're getting yourself into, because, especially, and I'll speak for myself as a man of color in nonprofit, that is a challenge, right? You don't see a lot of males of color in this space, and oftentimes the people that are funding us don't look like us. And so being, equipped for that, but also just being grounded in, your purpose, I think is critically important, which I think the rest of the panelists alluded to prior.
Well, I want to thank our panelists so much. This has been a really meaningful way to spend an evening. I'm going to remember for a long time Karraine saying, learning how to walk in your truth, and Marvin saying, finding your purpose. I think that's something that as we start this academic year and we get into the sort of bustle of things, even in the midst of our kind of continued slowdown with COVID, that we all need to think through. And so I thank you for bringing all of these questions and important issues to our attention. So I want to thank everyone for the engaging discussion. I want to thank the people that participated in the chat and raised questions. I apologize to those that I wasn't able to get to, but I know the alumni office is tracking this, and I know that they'll want to engage people because obviously there's a lot of alumni interest in these issues. So I encourage everyone who's on the call to continue and participate in the other virtual long walk events. And again, I just want to say a big virtual thank you to our panelists again. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.